This is Queso and this is Talberto, and we're here on the Queso You Didn't Know podcast. Today we're going to be going deeper into historical narratives and uncover the truth behind the myths. We're tackling a group whose name alone conjures images of shadowy figures, secret rituals, and drug-induced fantasticism, the Hashishans, more commonly known in Western pop culture as the Assassins. Now, the term Hashishans, as I said, evokes these shadowy figures, secret rituals, drug-induced fantasticism. It's a mystical, mysterious, murderous cult that has permeated literature, film, and video games for centuries. However, historical scholarship reveals a far more complex and nuanced reality. The group was popularly known as the Hashishans, or Assassins. They were, in fact, the Nizari Ismailis, or Ismailis, a significant and distinct branch of Shia Islam that rose to prominence in the 11th century CE. Their emergence was deeply intertwined with the turbulent political and religious landscape of medieval Persia, which is now modern Iran and Syria. It was a period marked by intense conflicts with dominant Sunni powers like the Seljuk and Abbasid empires. They were not a mere cult, but they were a sophisticated, ideologically driven entity with a unique form of statecraft.
Yes, so it's a it's a pretty it's a pretty big variety soup, I'll say, because it's nice. I don't know about you, but for me to know that apparently had some type of cult influence, and I've always been a fan of cults and how they played a significant but secret part in civilization just as a whole and the development of it. And familiar stories, familiar faces as far as history, because you mentioned the Persians, I believe, and the Sumerians. So definitely familiar with those, as a lot of people are. So we got a lot ahead. Should be a hell of a ride.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, cult comes from occult, and people think a cult means something terrible and bad. A cult used to just mean something hidden. It was a hidden esoteric knowledge that needed to be revealed, not something that is mysterious and evil. So the Nizari Ismailis, they were not an isolated singular order, but a widespread religious sect with deep historical roots and a presence across various regions of the Islamic world. Their actions were rooted in a broader religious and political movement, signifying a structured, ideologically driven entity rather than just a mere clandestine group of killers. Furthermore, the very name Hashishans, or assassins itself, is a subject of considerable historical debate and is largely a product of historical bias and propaganda, as we see on this show time and time again, rather than an accurate self description or reflection of their practices. The popular narrative linking these people to hashish and the use of it in their rituals is a pervasive misconception that requires careful deconstruction. This episode aims to provide a comprehensive historical analysis of the Nizari Ismailis, separating fact from fiction and exploring the religious, political, and social dimensions in detail to reveal the true story of this fascinating and misunderstood group.
So this is interesting not only because it's going to correct historical narratives for the general public, but also in our little, this is sort of a bastardized word during this decade, but entanglement. Because I remember back in the day, you told me about the Hashishans. This is how I first heard about them. So it was, I'll say, a pleasant surprise or a pleasant thought that you would bring up the Hashishans and have us do a subject for it, because to a certain degree, especially, I don't want to say I just looked at them as a bunch of a bunch of a bunch of ancient killers who smoked weed and murdered motherfuckers. but to a certain degree, it's like I didn't know too much more. So it's nice to it's nice to sort of kill two birds in one stone as far as the general public's perception and my perception, I'll say, of them.
I feel that. I feel that 100%. And I will say that I am going to be doing a lot of self correcting myself here because I knew what I knew in high school. And, the more you learn about a subject, the more you realize you don't really know anything at all. The rise of the Nizari Ismaili state. To understand the Nizari Ismaili, we have to first trace their origins within the complex tapestry of Shia Islam and the political turmoil of the 11th century. This was a period rife with dynamic struggles and religious schisms. The Nizari Ismaili trace their origins to a significant lineage within Shia Islam, beginning with Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, who circa 765 CE, and his son Imam Ismail. The lineage formed the broader Ismaili movement, which emphasized the importance of a living, infallible Imam. And an Imam is a holy man, as I recall from my knowledge of Islam, I believe. So the Nizari Ismaili trace their origins back to a living, infallible, holy man that, is more or less a god in a sense, from what I'm gathering here now. The Ismaili movement gained considerable influence, culminating in the establishment of the Fatimid Caliphate, an Ismaili Shia dynasty that ruled over vast territories in North Africa and Egypt from 969 to 1171. They were not just political rulers, but also lavish patrons of learning, establishing renowned institutions like Al Azhar University. The crucial moment for the Nizari branch occurred after the death of Fatimid Caliph Imam al Mustanir al Mustansir Billah in 1094. Al Mustansir had publicly designated his elder son Nizar as his heir. However, the powerful Vizier al-Afdal Shahanashah, for political reasons, instead installed al-Mustanir's son al-Mustali as the new caliph. And I'm so sorry if I'm butchering these names. I probably am. I'm doing my best, so please bear with us. The usurpation led to a profound dynastic strife and a fundamental schism within the broader Ismaili movement. The Ismailis in Iran and Syria, including the prominent missionary Hassan as-Sabat, staunchly refused to recognize the new Fatimid caliph, transferring their allegiance to Nizar and his descendants. This act of loyalty to the rightful designated imam marked the formal birth of the Nizari Ismaili sect.
Okay, so this is definitely putting things into perspective because what I know about the difference between the Sunnis and the Shiites is the Sunni Muslims, they believe that anybody can be the head of Islam, and the Shiites believe that that person should be a descendant of Muhammad. So them refusing to acknowledge that marks a schism, so to speak, marks a distinction because they want to separate from the traditional Shiite way of doing things. So this is really following up, and it really leads into, on a side note, sort of, because not only are they religious leaders, but they are sponsors of education and things like that. It's sort of a fantasy like, or a fairy tale like view of what a ruler would be, somebody who would also be an intellectual patron just for the sake of being it. But I guess I guess that was sort of a thing, you know. I guess maybe there is a tiny bit of deserved nostalgia for certain things of a certain sort, you know.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely, because
that's the case, I suppose.
I definitely agree with that, because this split, it effectively broke the remnants of the Fatimid Empire, dividing Ismailis and Mustali and Nizari branches. The Nizari found themselves at odds with both the Mustali Fatimid caliphs in Cairo and the deeply hostile Sunni Abbasids in Baghdad, as well as the powerful Seljuk Turks. This political isolation and pervasive hostility necessitated a new, unconventional form of statecraft for the Nizaris to survive. So there was this architect of the state, our good man Hassan-i Sabah, the undisputed architect of the Nizari Ismaili state, and a figure whose immense intellectual and religious depths often gets overshadowed by the sensationalized assassin legends. You know, um, he was born in Persia, around 1050, into a Twelver Shia family. His early life was marked by rigorous study of theology and philosophy. He converted to Ismailism by age 17, drawn to its esoteric interpretations and the concept of a living Imam. His conversion was followed by extensive religious training under prominent da'is, missionaries, becoming a master of Ismaili doctrine. He visited Cairo around 1076, becoming a full missionary himself. During his time in Cairo, Hassani-i Sabah openly supported Nizar as the rightful successor to the imam as a rightful successor to the imamate, incurring the displeasure of the chief of the Fatimid army, leading to a brief imprisonment and eventual expulsion from Egypt. Upon his return to Iran, he traveled widely, prominently promoting the Nizari cause and consolidating support. He was a formidable scholar of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and philosophy, demonstrating a keen intellect that informed his strategic thinking. This deep theological and intellectual background suggests that the Nizari movement was not merely a political insurgency, but an ideologically sophisticated and religiously driven enterprise, built on a robust intellectual and spiritual foundation, with a clear theological justification for its actions and its unique approach to power.
Yeah, it's showing, I say, a certain theme. Speaking of ancient people and certain themes, just the whole theme of being exiled and they pick up a wide range of topics. Like, are you familiar with Pythagoras?
The one that did the a squared times b squared equals c squared, right?
He was, I think so, the Pythagorean theorem, a mathematician, but just an overall intellectual. He had a group of people underneath him who learned from him. Like legend would say of him that when he greet the ocean, he would say, "Greetings, ocean." Then the ocean would say back to him, "I greet thee, Pythagoras." And of course, whether or not you want to believe this is 100% true, it just speaks to the theme of esoteric belief and thinking and how lots of people took parts in it to a certain degree, how the way our DNA is shaped. The guy who discovered that was on acid. No shit. And just the fact that TVs were created in order to capture spirits within the glass.
I didn't know that either, man. You're teaching me today too.
Yeah, just the all seeing eye is a really interesting logo because esoteric thought, it always overlooks our society and things like that in different ways. So I just like the theme of, and just for the record, as far as Pythagoras, he was eventually burned to death because he wouldn't give up what he knew. And it just goes back to the theme of somebody dying for knowledge and willing to die for it. And this is, of course, the case with this guy.
It almost makes me think of, the story of Prometheus, how he gave fire and knowledge to man, and then he spent the rest of his life having a crow eat his liver.
hmm So definitely a unique approach to power is definitely what that was, to describe it the least. But aside from that, the establishment of the Nizari state is of hell of an importance.
It really is, because it truly began with Hassan-i Sabah's strategic acquisition of the Alamut Fortress. Disguised as a school teacher, he meticulously infiltrated the Alamut Castle in Dayam, Persia, and it was a stronghold that was strategically vital to Persia and the future empire that this man is helping to create. Through a masterful campaign of conversion and persuasion, he gradually gained the loyalty of the garrison and local populace, leading to a bloodless coup where he ousted the Zaidi lord, paying him 3,000 gold dinars for the fortress. Which, if we all remember our Bible, that's a hell of a lot of money. So, through the masterful campaign of this and his intellect, he did this bloodless coup. And this bloodless capture, relying on intellect and ideology rather than brute force, and the subsequent establishment of a territorially scattered yet cohesive state, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of unconventional warfare and state building, prioritizing strategic infiltration and ideological conversion over direct military confrontation.
That's mm, that's a that's a mark, I'll say, or a marker of the level he was on. Because I mean, bloodless coup, that says everything in itself. That from whatever knowledge he was gaining, and I'm sure we can agree that esoteric knowledge will be the perfect type of precursor to somebody who will have the attitude that they can go above conventional human means of interacting, of handling disputes. You know what I mean?
1000%. It's like when they talk about somebody that's playing 3D chess, this is a man that was playing 3D chess.
Mm, that's a hell of a way to put it. I don't know if I definitely never heard that, but 3D chess is a hell of a way to put it.
And so Alamut, meaning Eagle's teaching, became the central headquarters of the Nizari Ismaili state, maintaining its independence for 166 years. Hassan immediately embarked on extensive refortification efforts, enhancing walls, building cisterns, and developing terraced fields for self sufficiency, turning it into a virtually impregnable mountain stronghold. Now, the Nizari state was not a conventional empire with contiguous territories, but a highly effective network of strategically brilliant mountain fortresses, each a testament to their ingenuity, resilience, and unique approach to power and the power of protection. The Alamut Castle, perched high in the rugged Alborz Mountains of Iran, was the vibrant heart of the Nizari Ismaili state, serving as the administrative, spiritual, and military center. Its strategic genius lay in the utilization of natural defenses, including sheer cliffs, deep rivers, narrow valleys. It rendered it nearly impregnable to conventional siege warfare. This castle featured multiple layers of formidable defenses, including quadruple walls, distinct sections for various functions, and limestone-lined storage rooms for provisions. The surrounding valley was meticulously transformed with terraced fields and a sophisticated irrigation system, ensuring the fortress's self-sufficiency during prolonged sieges. This allowed them to withstand attacks from much larger armies. It was also fabled not only for its defenses, but for its heavenly gardens, library, and laboratories where philosophers, scientists, and theologians could debate in intellectual freedom. It housed astronomical instruments, rare manuscripts, and was a hub of intellectual activity. It suggests the Nizari state understood what intellectual and cultural strength meant and that it was vital for survival and legitimacy as a military might. They aimed for intellectual autonomy and cultural resilience, not just political survival through various violence and different means, but creating a unique blend of spiritual and strategic power.
Mm. It's a blessing to think of the fact that something like this was in existence, but truthfully, if you really look at it, speaking of how esoteric thought has always guided mankind, whether it's saw it that way or not. If you look at the first presidential inauguration, it looks like a Masonic ceremony. And it's no secret, especially by now, especially by people who are intellectual to some degree or not, that George Washington was a Freemason. You know what I mean? As a lot of presidents were. So really looking at it, it really drives the idea further into my head, even as somebody who's well versed on this, that even if it didn't exist in the most, because this is a real fantasy, like this reminds you of some shit Aladdin would do if he had his own civilization, basically. But even if it's not done in the most fantasy movie like way, regardless of that, esoteric thought and hidden thought still guides practically, in a lot of ways, every aspect of our daily life, even when it comes to the government. Like, do you know how the designs of Washington, D.C., how it's laid out according to the stars?
I didn't know that.
That's a that's a definitely that's definitely a fact too. But yeah, I think every Easter or on a certain day, the moon rises perfectly above the White House. So it definitely has a certain design in mind.
Well, Alamet was merely the headquarters of a larger geographical dispersed network of strategic strongholds through Persia, Iraq, and Syria. These included Girdku, Lamassar, and Mainam Diz in Persia, and Masyaf, Kaf, and Kadmis in Syria. In Syria, the key fortresses like Masyaf became the base for the Syrian Grand Master Rashid al-Din al-Sinan, referred to by European crusaders as the Old Man of the Mountain, a figure shrouded in his own legends. This decentralized fortress-based model was a highly effective adaptation for a minority group facing powerful, centralized empires. It enabled them to wage asymmetric warfare, tying down larger forces and creating zones of influence without needing to control a vast contiguous territory. The Nizari fortification adhered to four main principles: naturally strong defensive positions, mutual support and communication, e.g., by beacon fires and messengers, and sufficient construction materials, and fertile ground slash water for self-sufficiency. Masyaf, for instance, was strategically located at the mouth of an important route into the mountains, acting as a counter to a nearby crusader castles. This sophisticated system helped them to maintain cohesion and coordination across such a scattered state, and it necessitated sophisticated communication. It is thought that the Nazir Ismailis utilized a highly efficient pigeon postal system, as well as a network of swift messengers and beacon fires to communicate rapidly between their isolated fortresses. So far from being a random collection of fanatics, as you said, the Nizari Ismailis were a deeply ideological driven community with a complex religious doctrine and a highly organized social structure that underpin their actions. The core of the Nizari Ismaili belief is the absolute centrality of the imamate. They believe in a living, physically present imam who serves as the spiritual and temporal leader of the community. As you said, tracing an unbroken hereditary chain from Prophet Muhammad through Ali and Ismaili, or from Ali and Ismail. The imam is considered the guide and intercessor between humans and God, and the possessor of divine knowledge, the prime teacher who provides spiritual guidance for the community. The Imam's authority is profound, allowing him to interpret the Quran and Islamic law according to the exigencies of the time, even to change or abrogate certain aspects of the law when deemed necessary for the community's well being. The theological flexibility was crucial for the Nizari community to adapt and survive in hostile environments, allowing for pragmatic decisions. For instance, the strategic use of targeted assassinations or later diplomatic alliances could be justified by the Imam's divine guidance for the community's preservation and the propagation of their faith.
Right on. So yeah, I could see this is definitely adding to what I feel as an Aladdin type structure as far as the story goes, because it was a faith that spread out to the people in real time and let them know that these esoteric beliefs are what's going to guide them throughout their lives for what they need to achieve for their nation.
100%, 100%. So the Nizari theology is characterized by its emphasis on independent reasoning, pluralism, and social justice. They adhere to the Jafari school. Hey, Jafar, look at that, talking about Aladdin. The Jafari school of jurisprudence, a prominent Shia legal tradition. A cornerstone of their intellectual tradition is the focus on deeper esoteric meaning of Islam, achieving through tawil a process of spiritual hermen- hermeneutics that delves between the literal meaning of Scripture. Nizari thought also integrated a Hellenic philosophy, particularly Aristotelian reasoning and Neoplatonic metaphysics, with Islamic scripture. This rationalist approach seeks to understand the outwardly apparent and penetrate to the inner underlying reality. This deep theological and intellectual background suggests the Nizari movement was not merely a political insurgency, but an ideologically sophisticated and religiously driven enterprise, built on a robust intellectual and spiritual foundation, with a clear theological justification for its actions and a unique approach to power.
Yeah, you really got to respect that, just the fact that they were smart enough. Speaking of using this as an avenue for people to look at ancients as simply humans, we don't give them credit a lot of times for knowing that a lot of the stories, or all of the stories basically, that they were using to help them cope with life, we don't give them credit for being people who knew that these were just allegorical, you know?
And the fact that there was such a deeper meaning to what they were doing, and you think about what makes all of this so interesting is we can go crack open a history book and know exactly how the story ends. What's so fascinating is seeing how these things play out, and the fact that at the time, like we were talking about with Hannibal didn't know he was going to end in defeat, and the Romans didn't know they weren't going to have their entire city burned down the next day. That we only know all of this in hindsight, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah, you know, I guess I guess there's just nothing like a full story. Nothing like knowing what's going to happen. What do you think this says about man and his capability of handling things? Because truthfully, lots of world leaders today can really learn from this guy as far as how to take on issues, just take on conflict that's going to happen when you're at the head of state, so to speak.
I think the allegory of playing 3D chess is a big part of it. As silly as it sounds, there's always someone born, not to say that these people weren't as modern as we are, but you get somebody that's born in an era that is, in a very real sense, a modern man. And they see the strings that attach everything, and they know just how to pull them to manipulate them in such a way that I don't know if it's the way they think, if it's that they're born out of place in time, but I think that it says of man that a lot of people don't think of things in a way that is so critical. They don't think outside of the box. And every now and then you get someone, as silly as it sounds, you kind of need, he might have been crazy as shit for all we know, but I think you need someone that's crazy as shit to look at things differently, to be able to see the bigger picture and show you the way forward.
Yeah, speaking of somebody who's crazy as shit, Hitler said that it's no it's no wonder that man has mastered the plague better than he's mastered tuberculosis, and that man is able to handle distress when it comes in great waves, as opposed to a subtle declining sickness or deletion of some sort. And That's why man has mastered the plague, but tuberculosis masters man, because the plague came to us in great waves of disaster, to where it was just horrendously apparent that this was a problem that we needed to deal with. But tuberculosis kills us off subtly and slowly. Yeah, that was a hell of a quote. That right there is a quote for you.
It's very poetic. It does definitely put into focus how man does view certain things and how man takes on certain things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talking about the structure, the dais and fidei, which is a very sophisticated
Okay.
hierarchy that existed, including the dais, the missionaries, who spread the faith, and a specific group known as the fidei, or fidein, who formed a dedicated class of operatives characterized by their unwavering commitment to the Imam and willingness to embrace martyrdom for the cause. Beyond the operational elite, the broader Nizari communities exhibited a diverse social structure across regions like Afghanistan, Central Asia, Iran, South Asia, Syria, and Yemen, demonstrating their widespread influence and communal organization. So their political objectives stemmed from a deep-seated theological conviction about the illegitimacy of existing Sunni caliphates, the Abbasid and Seljuk, and a desire to establish a state based on their own interpretation of Islamic leadership and justice. Their struggle for religious and political autonomy also brought about cultural changes, including strengthening of the Farsi language and the promotion of Iranian patterns over Arabic and Caliphate patterns in some regions. Targeted assassinations, for which they became infamous, were a strategic tool employed to avert debilitating wars against their numerically superior adversaries and to demonstrate unwavering commitment to living free from vassalage. They were a means of defense and deterrence. So that means that the most enduring and pervasive myths about the Nazir Ismailis is encapsulated in the very name assassins. It's a tale of drug-addled killers and paradise gardens, a sensational narrative that overshadowed the historical truth for centuries. But what's the real story behind this infamous label? So it was a derogatory use, and there were figurative meanings behind this, you know? So the term assassin originates from the Arabic word hashishin, or its variants like hashishia or hashishiyun. But it was emphatically not a self-designation used by the Nizari Ismailis themselves. It was a derogatory nickname employed by their enemies, primarily the Fatimid Caliph Al-Amir in Cairo, and the earliest known use dating back to 1122. It was then adopted and spread by Sunni historians and chroniclers. The adoption and widespread use of this derogatory term was a deliberate act of demoralization, demonization, and psychological warfare against the Nizaris, aimed at discrediting their religious legitimacy and political objectives by portraying them as irrational and dangerous. The term hashishi in medieval Arabic canonated meanings such as outcasts, rabble, noisy or riotous, or even those of loose morals, rather than literally implying hashish users. The linguistic weaponization was a strategic tool to portray them as irrational, drug-addled fanatics unworthy of respect or serious consideration.
Hmm. Interesting. So I guess that's like I said, interesting, but expected that they would actually get that rep from their enemies. And it, I wouldn't say overshadowed to a certain degree, only because I feel that not enough people know about the Hashishans to begin with. But for those who do know about it, it's that's probably the only thing or the main thing that you'll take from them, that they were supposedly these cold blooded killers who enjoyed choking on reefer. Apparently, it's a tactic that worked, I guess, because it did sort of play onto their reputation.
And it's one that is still used today. You know, if you call someone that, in the 60s, you say, oh, he's a pot smoking hippie. Why should we consider what he says as anything? It's a good way for the right wing to kill off what a left wing person might have to say. And it's a tactic that has been used so many times. And it didn't help that you had Marco Polo influence this. The popular legends were heavily influenced and sensationalized by accounts of those such as his, who claimed in his travels, written around 1298, to have heard tales of a drug misidentified as hashish, used to induce visions of Paradise Garden for initiates. This supposed experience, complete with wine, beautiful virgins, and sensual pleasures, was allegedly orchestrated by the Old Man of the Mountain, referring to the Nizari leader Rashid al-Din Sinan, to convince initiates they had glimpsed paradise, thereby ensuring their absolute obedience and willingness for self-sacrifice. Marco Polo's travels played a significant role in disseminating these sensationalized legends throughout Europe, but his account is widely considered fictional as he never directly visited or investigated the Nizari strongholds. Other European accounts from crusaders and travelers also contributed to the spread of these fantastical stories. The persistence of these myths reflect a Western inability or unwillingness to understand a complex non-Western religious and political movement, leading to the creation of black legends to explain seemingly strange or incomprehensible behavior. These fictions proved and served as psychological cultural functions for medieval Europeans, simplifying a complex adversary into a fantastical, drug-crazed cult, thereby justifying their own biases and fears rather than engaging with the Nizari's sophisticated ideology.
Yeah, I guess in those days, European travelers were more or less advertisers on how the rest of the world was like. Of course, they informed them on true things that would benefit their area, like there'd be all these spices and material from all these other places, but they just had to leave a stain on the name, and Marco Polo, I guess, of all people, because if you really look at it, the stories of Marco Polo and things like that is what really put the battery in Christopher Columbus's back to be who he was. It's like people looked at Marco Polo as like the messiah of European exploration, and they really took his word for bond. They really took it for gold.
Hands down. And it is something like you said, it put the battery in his back and it got him going that same way. But it's also so funny that, not to be that person, but that white people can't seem to understand or fathom that someone of a different hue could be more intelligent and more capable than they.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, especially in those days, I really think it was more of a defense mechanism, so to speak. Because not to get too deep, but between me and you and lots of other people who study race and whatnot, they just come to the conclusion that around those days, the days of early European exploration, whites basically sailed around the world and got a basic taste of what the rest of the world looked like. And they saw that they were a minority, and they created racism as a system, as a defense mechanism to stop themselves from being wiped out numerically. I mean, there was a guy who, I don't know if you've seen the video clip of an Asian guy and an old white guy, and the Asian guy asked him why he wants to vote for Trump, and he says he wants to vote for Trump because Trump is going to do everything he can to stop whites from becoming a minority in America. So,
It's still happening now.
yeah. So I think it was more so them seeing it as coming up with those tales of foreigners as a defense mechanism. You know what I mean?
And realizing that not only were these people smarter and more superior, they were in vast numbers compared to the white Europe too.
Oh, yeah. Like, just to think about the fact that, just a little side note, I never heard it be described as this way, but like India exists within Asia, of course, within the continent of Asia. But the fact that India itself is what they call a subcontinent, it's like it's its own fucking mini continent, basically, a subcontinent, like filled with lots of people itself, and that's not even the entire Asia.
1 billion people in India alone. You're right. You're right. And you take that and you think about the fact that these people, I'll tell you what, one of my favorite stories comes from the Crusades. And they had the Byzantine Empire, which, like we said before, they called themselves Roman. They still saw themselves as Roman. So sure, they are white. They are a weird, different type of white. But when the European Crusaders came over there to team up with them on these crusades, the Byzantines were like, we don't want these people here. They're savages. They're
Mm,
gross. They're disgusting. They shit in fields and fuck goats. We don't like them.
damn. Well, that's something that our listeners will find humorous, I hope. I'm just messing around. Modern scholarship refutes.
It refutes that hashish connection. Prominent Orientalist scholars like Silvestre de Sassi in the 19th century and contemporary historians like Farhad Daftari have conclusively demonstrated the drug theory is unfounded and based on hostile propaganda. Crucially, there is no mention of hashish used in connection with Persian assassins in their own extensive records, including the vast library of Alamat, which was later destroyed by the Mongols, which we will get into on a later episode. The absence of internal evidence is a strong indicator against the myth. The Fidai's motivation stemmed from profound religious ardor, unwavering devotion to the Imam, and deep ideological conviction, not from drug-induced states. The Nazaris did not use the term Hashishin for themselves. They referred to their movement as al-Da'wa al-Jadida, the new doctrine, and their operatives as Fidayin, one who is ready to sacrifice their life for a cause. And the effectiveness of the Fidai was a result of deep spiritual conviction, rigorous ideological training, unwavering loyalty, which fostered absolute obedience and a willingness for self sacrifice, rather than any chemical inducement. Their actions were calculated and strategic, not the result of a drug addled frenzy.
Right on, right on. Food doctrine is a hell of a way to put it, and I like that because to be real with you, between me and you, I kind of hate when you scan through things in books and you're like, yeah, I gotta come up with a nickname or something for this because, I'm not gonna remember this. You read to basically understand the general point of things. Certain things you can leave out, you know what I mean? The new doctrine does it, and I can definitely picture them calling themselves that, and I really don't see any other title being as fitting.
So, if not drugs, what
Hmm.
truly made the Nizari Fidai so formidable and feared, and what made these operatives? It was a combination of profound religious devotion, highly specialized training, and a strategic understanding of psychological warfare. The Fidai were elite operatives specifically tasked with carrying out dangerous missions, including targeted assassinations. They were not a large army, but a small, highly effective force. Their effectiveness stemmed from profound religious ardor and unwavering, unquestioning devotion to their Imam, whom they believed to be divinely guided. The devotion often led them to willingly embrace martyrdom, seeing it as a path to spiritual reward. An illustrative anecdote encountered and recounted by contemporary sources describes Rashid al-Din Sinan signaling a Fidai to jump from a high castle parapet, which the operative did unhesitatingly, crying, "God is great!" as he fell. This apparent lack of fear of death and their absolute loyalty was baffling to the Crusaders and other adversaries, who consequently propagated black legends to explain behavior that seemed incomprehensible to the medieval Western mind, rather than acknowledging the power of their faith. It indicates a sophisticated system of ideological doctrinations and spiritual training far beyond any drug use.
Definitely. But like it said, this shows that, I mean, truthfully speaking, not only does this show that they were beyond simple drug use, but it shows that if you're gonna be any type of army or organized warriors of any kind, it can't, truthfully speaking, if you're gonna have any type of success or prominence in history, obviously you guys are gonna be people who do a little more than get high and go kill people. Like that's not gonna really turn out well in most or really no cases. Like even if you really look at it, like even on a street level, like on a side note, not to get off on a tangent, but if you look at it, being a gangbanger is a lot more complicated than just being a young, dumb motherfucker running around blowing other people's brains out. Some of them, or a lot of them, really are really strategic and militant with the way they are about taking out other people. So, with anything, there's going to have to be some type of strategy.
Hands down, exactly. And the Fadai were highly trained professionals, masters of stealth, disguise, and various forms of weaponry. Their training was rigorous and comprehensive. Their training encompassed advanced spying techniques, armed and unarmed, and it included combat training from martial arts known as jhana, incorporating striking, grappling, and low kicks, and the art of infiltration. They learned to blend seamlessly into different societies and environments. They were adept at going into deep cover, sometimes for years, to gain the trust of their targets and their entourages, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike. This extensive and specialized training demonstrate that their operations were highly professional and meticulously planned, rather than, as you said, random acts of violence or drug frenzies. The Nazaris developed a sophisticated doctrine of targeted political violence as a highly specialized form of statecraft, a precision tool rather than a blunt instrument.
Hmm, I suppose so. That's another level. I guess it's all in the training. You know what I mean? It kind of gives me reminiscence of what I'd hear about the Nation of Islam, how they were really militant and organized with the way they did things, how they would be trained in martial arts, in particular Hapkido. You heard of that, haven't you?
I have, but not super deep.
Yeah, they'd be trained in that, and just the uniformity of them, period, and the fruit of Islam, their security, who were just notorious badasses. It kind of gives me the vibes from that, just high level training.
And I think Islam plays a big part of it. That I think these guys definitely are very both the Nation of Islam, as you said, and the belief of the Shiites here and the Nazir Ismaili. I think a
Damn,
big part of it is truly
you
believing in what you're doing. So, these assassinations were not random acts of terror, but carefully calculated strategic tools aimed at achieving specific political and religious objectives for the survival and influence of their minority state. Their primary targets were powerful Seljuk and Abbasid rulers, viziers, and military commanders, whom the Nizirs viewed as impious usurpers and oppressors of their community. Notable victims included the powerful Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Mulk, 1092 CE, and the Crusader leader Conrad of Montferrat, 1192 CE. The preferred method was typically a dagger, with a fatal stabbing to the chest. Pretty badass, if you ask me. Often carried out in public spaces to amplify the psychological impact and send a clear message. Fidai were often instructed not to commit suicide, but to be killed by captors, further cementing their image as the fearless martyrs. These targeted killings were employed as an alternative to large-scale military confrontations. You see, these would have been devastating for their numerically smaller forces. A single precise assassination was seen as a way to effectively reduce aggression against the Ismailis, deterring larger armies from attacking their fortresses. The Nizari's use of public targeted assassinations was a potent form of psychological warfare. It was designed to instill fear and dread across the Middle East. The sheer audacity and precision of their strikes created an aura of invisibility and invincibility. The fear that generated from these attacks became a significant bargaining tool, sometimes leading powerful adversaries to comply to Nizari demands through intimidation alone, without the need for any open warfare. The strategy allowed a smaller decentralized power to exert significant influence over larger, more conventional empires, demonstrating an early form of information warfare where reputation and fear were as potent as military might. The principles they employed, such as intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, and targeted strikes, remain remarkably relevant in modern espionage and military tactics.
Mm, pioneers of warfare, I suppose. And not so much that, as much as they are just a rare species, pretty much the different tactics to make themselves look invincible and things like that. It's just something you only get in a select few groups of warriors, of trained killers. This is just for the specifically disciplined. That's what I get out of this.
100%. You are dead accurate on that, I think.
Yeah, and also just generating fear through the fact of your dedication to death alone, if that's what it means. Like I said, that's something that simply speaks for itself, and that's a part of their reputation in and of itself.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying with the power of esoteric schools of thought and just esoteric knowledge in general. That these guys were so well trained and so unafraid of death that it past invincibility to me, it almost makes you think these guys know something we don't, which adds to that fear.
Yeah, definitely. Not to get too deep, but the basic string of consensus in ancient mystery schools dealing with esoteric thought is that when they go through initiation, they go through a series of hallucinogenic like events that are similar to life, just the whole event of life, birth, death, what seems like death, and coming out of that knowing that death isn't the end. That's definitely true in dealing with esoteric thought, knowing it gives you the lack of fear of death in you. And just a random thought, I spoke about Pythagoras and just the fact that I remember getting really deep into him. I was 19 and learning that he studied in different mystery schools in Egypt for 22 years. That wasn't even my whole life at that point. It's just an extreme dedication that people who go that route take.
Well, and you really taught me on him. I knew he was the man that created the Pythagorean theorem. I didn't know a lot about him past that. And to learn that he died by burning, it kind of signifies and ties back into that he knew something people didn't because he wasn't afraid to die by fire.
And it was basically because he wouldn't let a guy and a certain group of people join his mystery school. And he also created the musical octave that I'm sure you're familiar with. It was basically a toy we all had growing up. You tap on one piece of metal and it creates one note. Then along the lines of different pieces of metal on the same toy, it creates different sounds.
Almost like a xylophone, but like a earlier rendition.
Yeah, he created that. They said it was because according to what the mystery schools and what the esoteric beliefs were, they would say he could actually hear the earth moving and different planets moving through the spheres and stuff like that. And he would create music and art and different things based off of visions he would have and things like that.
Almost how you said, like, he greeted the ocean and the ocean greeted him back.
Right. Shit like that. Just a deep guy in the hole. Basically, he created that. Apparently, he was out and about one day and he heard hammers banging. I guess construction was going on. And he noticed that when the hammers struck different materials, it projected different sounds.
There's something so incredible about having that level, not just of intelligence, but awareness, because there are people out there that could be rocket scientists that only know how to study things within that boxed frame of mentality. To have that intelligence and see these different pieces of the world that nobody are seeing besides you. There's something incredible to that.
I can really see why they say that he was the greatest contributor to Western thought, that his age of living was the beginning of having to make sure you materialize these esoteric thoughts. You put them to paper and made them into ideas and ideals so they wouldn't get lost. And it's interesting that at the same time of his existence, basically, you have Confucius and Lao Tzu on the other side of the world doing what they do.
I did not even realize they were alive at the same time. And I'll tell you, going back to that thought of the life and death cycle, it makes me think of, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Judaism and the Kabbalah, but it's almost like the Kabbalah tree of life.
Yeah, it makes you think as above, so below. It's just for every aspect of life. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with, if you look at our organs, they resemble the cosmos, they resemble the solar system. And if you look at just looking at a tree, simply how a tree stretches its branches out, and below that, of course, its roots stretch down too.
And they say the roots are three times the size of the tree above. Yeah.
Right, right, exactly. Like that's something that was illustrated in the picture that I looked at today, and that's applicable in so many aspects of life.
See, I do love esoteric knowledge and I love, I've been getting into Hermeticism, and it's so funny that you mentioned that because part of Hermetics is that the God being, whatever you want to call it, God is being, not a being, but being itself. And so God made the cosmos made man, therefore everything has a spark of the divine and is made in the image of God or being because cosmos made man, we are the cosmos.
Definitely the great cosmic mind, as they call it, the great cosmic emanator, the thing that projects life, that somewhere out in the universe that's just projecting life. That's basically what all esoteric thought revolves around ultimately. Like, you're, of course, familiar with the Matrix, the saying the Matrix, and according to ancient mystery teachings, the Matrix is what's basically referred to as the emanations from the great cosmic mind that form the material world that we live in. I don't, I've, I hate to say, as a movie lover and as a fan of pop culture in general, that I have never seen The Matrix, but basically I get the gist of it. It's like people who are living in the matrix, the illusion, the emanations that form the material world that we live in, as opposed to the real world, the spiritual world, you know?
And then one must look inwardly to be able to see outwardly.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
And what I really like with the Matrix too, because they have the whole concept of everything's in ones and zeros, and a very fascinating esoteric thought experiment that I was reading on recently said, it's sort of like they say in Star Wars, right? Ben Kenobi says, "Don't trust your eyes; they will deceive you." And I like that in the Matrix, it's all ones and zeros, right? Everything that makes up their world, and it's sort of like the way that it was compared to is all of reality for us is a lie in a way and a false reality because when you look at your hands, you see hands, right? But technically, your hands are made up of millions of tiny little atoms. So, really, what you're seeing isn't actually what it is.
Right, right. And even things like when we look up at the sky, the stars that we think we're seeing are really the remnants of stars that have died long, long ago that are really not even alive anymore, aren't even really there. It's just that the time that it takes to get to the earth for us to see it, it just takes a hell of a long time. So by the time it makes it to us, it looks like it's there, but in reality, those are probably stars that have died off a long time ago.
I'll tell you what, we're going to have to do a deep dive more so. We're going to have to do maybe a series on esoteric schools of thought from around the world. As much as I want to avoid, no offense, Eurocentric histories, some of that may have to be brought in and tied into it, like Madame Blavatsky and all that. But really, a lot of that comes from the tantric knowledge of India.
Okay. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I'm definitely hip with the Bhagavad Gita. Have you heard of that?
Yep. I was studying that in the class I was just taking a few months ago. It got me a lot more into the different Indian esoteric thought schools, or Hindu, I guess I should say, not Indian.
The rishis and all that good stuff.
Oh, we're going to do a deep dive, my friend. Oh, that's going to be one we got to do. Now, the Nazir Ismailis navigated a treacherous geopolitical landscape, as we were saying, engaging in complex diplomacy and ultimately facing an existential threat that led to the fall of their state, but not their community. From their inception, the Nazir Ismailis were in constant conflict, as we said, with the dominant Sunni powers, primarily the Seljuk Sultanate and the Abbasid Caliphate. These empires viewed the Nizaris as a heretical and rebellious sect, even though it sounds like they were the ones that were kind of sticking to their guns closer on the religious side of things in their eyes. But that's a different story, leading to ongoing hostility and numerous failed attempts to dislodge them from their strongholds. Because these guys built up the greatest strongholds the world had ever seen at this point, right? So their external relations were complex and often pragmatic, driven by the need for survival. While known for terrorizing crusaders with assassinations, they also engaged in shifting alliances when it suited their strategic interests. In some instances, the Fidai even aided the broader Muslim cause against the Christian crusaders, joining forces with them. Later, they received assistance from Saladin's dynasty, demonstrating their ability to adapt their allegiance. Now, there are rumors that some assassinations, like that of Conrad of Montferrat, may have been instigated or hired by external parties, further complicating the narrative and highlighting the political intrigue of the era. This demonstrates that their actions, including assassinations, were not random, but part of a calculated foreign policy aimed at maintaining a balance of power and ensuring their community's survival amidst powerful adversaries. They were master strategists in a very dangerous world.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, all bullshit aside, this just shows the genius of them and the depth of the genius of them. It takes a lot to be able to move like a chess player, but to move spiritually also. It kind of reminds me of, I remember one of those days, like way back when I was on my way home, catching the train on the way home or whatever. There's this man and woman just having a conversation, just talking about life and everything. The guy was basically saying how life is like a chess move, it's like a chess game. You know that old saying. And she was like, yeah, but at the same time, it's all spiritual. And I kind of thought on how that in some way or another sums life up to a certain degree, And anybody who looks at it that way really won and will really be all right. And they reflect that, definitely.
And not to go into the Christian ideologies because, different strokes, different folks, and I don't necessarily believe it myself, but there is the whole concept of man cannot live on bread alone.
It's interesting, like how many things are from the Bible, because I never heard of that. I remember one time, out of all the biblical things, I remember never hearing that. I remember somebody making a joke out of that. Have you ever seen the movie Jersey Girl?
I haven't seen it, but I have heard of it.
All right, basically, it's this girl propositioning this guy for sex, and she knows that he watches porn, and he's like, come on, man cannot live on porn alone, or whatever. And basically making fun of when God asked him, where is your brother? Lots of sayings. Like, I know, like, we're not exactly Christian guys, but you can't lie.
We were
People,
raised in it.
yeah, but you can't lie that people have a point when they say that it's the greatest book of all time. Greatest kind of takes away from personal opinion and just points to fact. Greatest basically means most prominent. Like, not to take it back to the Bible, but like the whole Babylon the Great, which is basically talking about ancient Babylon, and it's a personification for something evil, like an illustration. But like, obviously it's not talking about something or some place that's good, but it points to the fact that it's great because Babylon definitely was a prominent kingdom in its day.
With it all being allegory, too, that you take the allegories and there is some good truth to it in some instances.
Oh, yeah. If we looked at the Bible in an allegorical standpoint and saw how a lot of it points to the zodiac and how it introduces new sections of the zodiac, like how the story of Jesus was to announce that we were entering the age of Pisces with all the mentions of fish and things like that.
I never actually looked at it like that. I've never heard that stand from it, but now that you say it, it makes a lot of sense actually.
Yeah, even with the age of Taurus, I'm pretty sure being mentioned during the stories of Moses. I don't remember exactly pinpoint per se, but I know that there's a story of him and a cow and a calf, or a bull or some type of creature.
Baal,
Hmm.
Baal, Baal, the golden calf. The one that what's very interesting with Baal too is he was on the same pantheon as Yahweh. Yahweh was a war god, and Baal, I forget exactly what god he was, but he was one of the older gods, and so he smelt the golden calf and made them drink of the ashes, which kind of is a good point because that's them literally ingesting the bull.
And those are those are some interesting guys.
And then you look into what I find interesting is the use of the word Elohim in the Old Testament
Hmm.
because they said that it was the Hebrew shifting from a pantheon to more of a, I can't even say it's a monotheistic, it's like a duotheistic because you don't have God without the devil, right? So it's not technically monotheistic, but when they started making that shift, they said the problem with the word Elohim is that Elohim could have been the God of gods, or Elohim was them literally talking about a pantheon of gods.
Elohim is basically the representation of the sun, the moon, and the five major planets, which includes the Earth. That's kind of adds in a lot to how the days of the week became to be named what they are, with Monday coming from the moon, Sunday coming from the sun, of course, and Saturday deriving from Saturn.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, there was another bad mofo on the rise here, as we'll see with the existential threats that these guys faced, because there was the Mongol threat that loomed large in the 13th century. And who was the Mongol threat? Well, of course, we're talking about Genghis Khan, because yes, I'm going to be that nerdy historian. We're talking Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde. The Nizari Ismailis recognized the existential danger and proactively sought to forge anti-Mongol alliances, demonstrating foresight and a willingness to engage with disparate powers. In 1221 CE, the Nizari Imam sent emissaries to Genghis Khan himself. Later, in 1238 CE, the Nizari Imam and Abbasid Caliphate sent a joint diplomatic mission to European kings proposing a Muslim-Christian alliance against the common Mongol threat. These diplomatic efforts, obviously because nobody can ever get along when it comes to shit, they proved ultimately unsuccessful, with the European kings eventually joining forces with the Mongols. The Mongols, urged by anti-Nizari Sunnis, prioritized the conquest of the Nizari state as a key objective. This proactive diplomatic engagement with distant powers, transcending traditional religious divides for strategic survival, reveals a sophisticated understanding of global geopolitics and a willingness to engage in long-term strategic planning, even if it ultimately didn't save their physical state.
I guess it doesn't matter how much you dive into the spirit world, you always have to deal with kind of base level, quote unquote, real world politics, no matter what level of life you're on. And I guess you can say that's definitely the case when you're at a, so to speak, high level of life, especially if you're the head of a crew like this. Like it said, you're having to basically play war politics is what all this is. You know what I mean?
And isn't it so funny? I always see this time and time again. Maybe I know I'm not the only one, but when you look at history, it almost makes you want to grab the motherfuckers that are part of it, shake them by the shoulders, and be like, do you realize if you could get the fuck out of your own way, we as a species could be 1,000 times beyond what we are?
Yeah, truthfully. I mean, they say if was a fifth, we'd all be drunk. I just think about sometimes like what you said. If people in ancient times just thought to be more basically more altruistic toward each other, just more peaceful. If they just thought to themselves to not war against every foreign force or every foreign nation that they come across, how would that fare for society so much like what state would we be in today? But go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say it goes a step further than that though, because not just ancient times, but today. I get animals fighting for meat because there's only so much of a supply left, right? When you're on that base level. But when you are, as a creature in a society, evolved enough to the point I can go to a machine and slurp down enough sugar that I give myself diabetes, don't we have enough that we can come together?
That's a hell of a thought. If only we get out of our way. I know you remember what's that? Isn't that old Dr. Seuss story, The Lorax? I think. Remember when they tried to teach us about polluting or some shit like that? Like
Yup.
this, yeah. It was about this guy called the Lorax, and he made money.
I speak for the
Yeah,
trees.
I speak for the trees have no tongue. Yeah. Oh man, I miss that shit. And then at the end, he put up this sign that said "Only if,"
Got that 100% correct.
and like only if people would think before they do shit like this, basically.
Well, I'll tell you, they thought a lot with the Mongol Empire. The Mongol campaign intensified by the mid 13th century despite Alamut's formidable defenses. Imam Rukn al-Din Kershah, the last Nizari ruler of Alamet, ordered the surrender of the fortress in 1256 CE, hoping to spare his people. The Mongol conquest was not just military, but a deliberate act of cultural and intellectual annihilation, as we see time and time again in these cultures. Hulagu Khan, which I'm assuming I'm pronouncing right because I only know how to say Genghis correctly, he permitted the historian Ada Malik Giuviani to explore Alamut's famous library before its destruction. Giuviani selectively salvaged a few works, but the vast majority of the library's holdings, particularly priceless doctrinal and scientific writings, were set aflame and utterly destroyed. Knowledge that we may never have relearned. The tragic loss of this primary source significantly contributed to historical obscurity and misrepresentation of the Nizari Ismailis, as it eliminated crucial records that could have proved a more accurate and nuanced understanding of their faith, history, and intellectual achievements, allowing the sensational myths to persist.
It's things like this that let you know how precious history truly is. Like there's some things that can never be replaced, like can truly never be replaced. I remember, like, for example, we spoke about 9/11 earlier this week, and I remember hearing about how, well, they were heading possibly, or at least trying to head towards the White House, right? After they hit up the World Trade Center. Was that a thing? Or
That's the one that supposedly crashed in the field in Pennsylvania.
okay, so they were at least trying to, and it was the thought that people at least thought that they possibly would, and it's just the thought that if they were to damage some things in there, if they were to damage the White House, there's things in there that can never be replaced for a fact. And to think about all these things that probably could not only lead us to learn and know so much real truth about them, but just about ourselves and the knowledge that they knew about human capability. Because of course, as we know, obviously they were into esoteric thought and practice. Mm, it's a it's a hell of a pill to swallow to know that this happened. And on a side note, because I didn't want to lose this, it just makes you think. It's messed up, of course, for obviously all of what I just said, but at the same time, you got to admit it is a nice strategy, and it shows that people back then they knew what was important. They knew that if you destroyed history and things like that, if you destroyed the history of a people, stuff like that would really hit home.
Right, you destroy the people, exactly. You destroy everything they ever were, and nobody ever knows they existed.
Yeah, they knew what mattered. I'll say that they knew how to play chess and not checkers.
Well, while the Persian strongholds fell, the Syrian branch was eventually destroyed by the Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1273 CE, who systematically dismantled their fortresses. Despite widespread destruction and the loss of their territorial state, the Nazir Ismailis demonstrated remarkable resilience. In 1275 CE, Nizari forces briefly recaptured Alamut, though it fell again in 1282, remarkably, and marking the definitive end of the Nizari Ismaili state and the Ismaili rule. However, the Nizari movement was not solely defined by its territorial control. Its strength lay in its spiritual leadership, the imamate, and the loyalty of its dispersed community. The resilience allowed the Nizari tradition to continue and adapt, transitioning from a military political power to a more dispersed spiritual community.
I guess at the same time, once certain things are thrown out there, it can't ever truly be lost because, of course, I mean, we may never know the fine print in intimate details of what goes on. But honestly, what you just talked about, it kind of reminds me of how in hip hop, there's a way of life, a way of thinking called the 5%er, like the 5% Nation. It's really influential. It was really influential as far as hip hop culture and hip hop slang. It actually predates it. And it's basically a branch off of the Nation of Islam. It's a more or less an esoteric version of it. And lots of aspects of that culture, even by people who may have not studied into it like that, because there are rappers who are official 5%ers, like for one example, or I guess a couple, Rakim, and I'm sure the name Big Daddy Kane seems familiar to you, but they both are in all of Wu-Tang Clan, basically. But yeah, and even for people who aren't, that whole slang and vibe and attitude still persists throughout hip hop, like the whole b-boy stance. If you look at old school pictures of them doing what's known as the b-boy stance, the original exact way of them doing it, they would have their right arm over their left at a 90-degree angle, going back how they participate into esoteric thoughts and things like that. They'd have it at an exact 90-degree angle. People who weren't 5%ers caught onto it and called it the B-boy thing. And even the whole term G, which people thought is an abbreviation for gangster, it's really an abbreviation for God. But just different things like that. It's very similar, I think.
I definitely agree with that for sure. Well, the extensive historical record reveals that the Hashishans, far from being a drug-addled cult, as we said, they were the Nizari Ismailis. And the Nizari Ismailis were a sophisticated and resilient branch of Shia Islam. Their history, as we have stated throughout this, is one that was of profound religious conviction, one of strategic ingenuity, and one that was continuously adapting in the face of relentless persecution. The pervasive myths of hashish-induced rituals in paradise gardens, popularized by Marco Polo, has been thoroughly debunked, as we said, and this misconception was originated as a derogatory label and used by their enemies. And it was a demonization that obscured their true nature and intellectual depth.
I guess at least enough has been left about them to get the truth about them out, at least for it to be known by people who are willing to know it, that they weren't their stereotype, more or less, you know?
Seek and ye shall know, right? But the Fidai, they were elite operatives. They weren't mindless fanatics. They weren't drug-addled weirdos. They weren't some cult that was deranged and out for mindless killing. They were highly trained individuals, and they were motivated by deep religious devotion to their living Imam, which created a willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice for their community, something that is very rare today, I think. Their tactics included targeted assassinations, but they weren't just random acts of killing. They were calculated forms of asymmetric warfare that created psychological leverage. It was designed to protect their minority state. Despite the eventual collapse of their territorial state under the overwhelming forces of the Mongol invasions and the tragic destructions of their invaluable library, the Nizari Ismailis demonstrated a remarkable capacity for adaptation and resilience. Their strong ideological and community structure allowed them to persist beyond their physical state, transforming a fortress based power to a globally dispersed spiritual community.
I think that really added a lot to what I said about how the Five Percenters really immersed itself into hip hop culture, even amongst people who aren't necessarily disciples of it. But I kind of think to be blunt, I was thinking about the guy. You remember Nipsey Hussle?
Yeah, yeah.
And he was a guy who he wasn't really appreciated in life like that as far as his music and things like that. He wasn't really necessarily famous like that, but he got his roses after he died in a big way. And with people like him, I kind of think about how if you do the right things and if you live a right way, you'll still get them afterward.
100%, because the enduring legacy of these people is evident in their vibrant modern communities led by Aga Khan, who continue to emphasize independent reasoning, pluralism, social justice, and humanitarian development worldwide. The Nizari Ismaili experience offers a compelling case and study of religious minority groups that, despite facing existential threats and historical vilification, successfully transformed its identity and its mission to thrive in a globalized world, shifting from military political struggle to humanitarian and intellectual leadership. Their story reminds us that history is often far more complex and fascinating than superficial narratives, and that true understanding requires a critical examination of sources and a willingness to challenge long held misconceptions. And I just want to say thank you for joining us on Queso Did You Know?
This has definitely been a hell of a story, and I'm sure we both learned a lot on and off script as far as what was said. And I guess you know what helped the Wu-Tang Clan be so good with their rhymes. 5% of philosophy.
What made them nothing to fuck with?
That's all that matters. Any day that I did that is a day well lived.
Amen.
Forever and ever.
Protect your neck.